Good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order and welcome you to the Hampton-Wilbraham Regional School District School Committee meeting. It is 7 o'clock p.m. I see that David Sanders from Wilbraham Public Access Channel is recording. Is there anyone else here recording this meeting? We will do roll call and alphabetical order. Bill Bontempi? Here. Cheryl Caruana? Here. Sean Kennedy? Here. Patrick Kiernan? Present. Lisa Murray? Here. Laura Ryan? Here. Michelle Boudreau? Aye. Here. If you would please stand, Patrick will lead us in the pledge of allegiance.
United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any reports here that need to call to order? Okay, so we will begin with introductions. I will begin. My name is Michelle Boudreau, and I'm the chair of the school committee representing Hampton.
My name is Laura Ryan, and I'm the vice chair.
Patrick Kiernan on school committee.
Sean Kennedy, school committee.
Bill Bontempi, school committee.
Lisa Murray, school committee. Cheryl Caruana, school committee.
Bruce Adams, state representative, Angel Dubois' office.
Jerry Spinks, state representative, Angel Dubois' office.
Jake Oliveira, 12-year in recovery school committee member. It's good to be back at the school committee table. Happy to represent the town of Wilbraham and Hampton, Massachusetts.
Carol Fitzgerald, co-chair of the Hampton Advisory Board.
Doug Boyd, Hampton Advisory.
Mark Ducey, Wilbraham Finance.
Kevin Hanks, chair of the Wilbraham Finance Committee.
Don Davenport, Hampton Selectman.
Thad Clavette, Hampton Capital Planning.
Mike Messier, Facilities Director.
Dave Rogers, Facilities and Maintenance.
Lisa Curtin, Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Professional Learning. Gina Roy, Director of Student Services.
Aaron Osborne, Assistant Superintendent for Finance, Operations, and Human Resources.
John Provost, Superintendent of the Hampton-Wilbraham Regional School District.
Thank you everyone for being here with us tonight.
We will begin with the FY 23-24 budget overview. Aaron Osborne.
Sure thing. The presentation I'm going to give covers most of these items because they are pertinent to the budget. So you'll see references to specific agenda items as we go through. We will finish towards the end, and we will talk about sort of the specific budget expectations we're at for next year at this point. So if we go to the next slide, Aaron, or oh,
It's not picking up the sound for the people at home for Zoom.
oh,
So if you could just do this over here.
okay.
It's not, you know how.
Do I need to
You
try
need
to
to
play
just put
it
it
again?
on the, put it on the, it should be on
Folks at home hear us now?
Do you currently have folks online?
Yes.
And how many people do you have online, Aaron?
Hmm?
I'm just looking for the number of people online
Okay.
for Mary.
8. 8 people on.
Do we have anyone from the Hampton or Wilbraham Board of Select? I just want to recognize them.
Yes. Craig Davis.
Yes. So Craig Rivets from Hampton Board of Select is also online, and I'm sorry, who else?
Joe Lawless.
Joe Lawless from Wilbraham
Wilbraham Finance Committee.
Finance. So do you guys need to gavel in, because how many?
Not yet.
Okay.
Is he handcuffed on a, what bar was he handcuffed?
No, she's in charge of Wilbraham.
Hampton Select.
And John Flynn.
From Hampton Select Board.
So,
Dawn, since you have 3 select board members from Hampton, do you guys need to gavel in?
No, it's not a deliberation for us.
Okay, I just want to make sure.
thank you. Back to you, Aaron.
Alrighty. So I have popped down to the very first informational slide. So as we start talking budget, we're going to begin by talking about the major drivers that are impacting our budget this year. Right now, we are looking at a 20% increase to our special education costs, which are already a large part of our budget. We're looking at an increase of as much as $830,000 to our budget. This is agenda item 5. A big piece of this comes straight down to the cost of our out-of-district placements. The state of Massachusetts, the Operational Services Division, has authorized a 14% increase to all of our private out-of-district placements. So that is a significant impact on our costs. That is in addition to, we are seeing an increase due to the return to school after COVID. We are seeing a significant increase in overall needs. Some of those needs do exist at some of these out-of-district placements or have required additional services or students to have to attend out-of-district placements. Gina will speak a little bit more on some of the other impacts. We're also finding significant increases in additional staffing costs. So that private placement cost is one factor, but then many of our students in these private placements have additional services, and we've seen increases of as much as 30% or more in those costs, those additional costs beyond just the tuition. So we're really seeing sort of extraordinary costs in that category. That's really the biggest single driver. If we scroll to the next slide, we get into circuit breaker. So circuit breaker is a reimbursement program. It does help offset some of our more costly special ed costs. The problem is we really only get a portion of those extremely high costs. So circuit breaker doesn't even kick in until we have incurred more than about $50,000 in costs. It's actually $49,494 in costs. So we bear the first almost $50,000, and then we get roughly 75% of the costs beyond that. So in a $100,000 out-of-district placement, we would pay $75,000 and get $25,000 back. I'm sorry, we would get. I'm doing the math and I apologize. 3/4 of 50,000 back, which is I'm failing to do the math. 37.5. Yeah, you get it. I'm not going to do the math. I'm failing at the moment. So you can see over the years, I did a quick tracking of our reimbursements for circuit breaker. In 2009, it was $632,000. Results of COVID and some work, I think, that Gina did to bring some programming back in district brought those numbers down in fiscal 20 and 21. So circuit breaker reimbursements are an indication of our total costs. You'll see, though, in 22, 23, and now what we're expecting in 24, we're going to try to take a better pencil to that estimated reimbursement in 2024. That's a very broad estimate by me. I think it's going to be at least $750,000. It may be significantly more based on the numbers we're looking at. But keep in mind, our expenses out are significantly higher than that. So for every dollar we're getting back in circuit breaker, we're expending $3 sometimes, right? Based on the math. John?
If I could just offer a little clarification on that $100,000 hypothetical.
Yeah.
Actually, we would have to, we'd be responsible for the entire $100,000 because it's a reimbursement program. So we would pay the money in this fiscal year and then receive a reimbursement that we could apply towards the next fiscal year. But initially, we're responsible for 100% of the cost. I just wanted to clarify that, please.
Okay. So this increase also represents increased needs for all of our students. So we have many, many students, in addition to any students who are circuit breaker eligible, that cost less than that $49,494. So what we're seeing is a student that may have cost us $25,000 is now costing us $35,000. And we're not getting circuit breaker reimbursement at all for that student. So those are costs internally that we end up bearing with no reimbursement whatsoever in sight for those. So a little bit on circuit breaker. As we get to the next item, another major driver is utilities. We're looking at a 17% increase across the board for utilities. For those people watching the press, I have, when I did out the electrical costs of Minichog, I went back multiple years prior to our lighting issue and used that as a baseline in order to predict Minichog's electrical needs for 2024, wherein our lighting should be fixed. So we are hopeful that it won't go up by more than 17%, but if you look at the article below, there's talks of consumers having price increases of as much as 60%. So we're predicting 10% across the board in addition to historical usage. So as we've looked at usage and tracked that, our usage does rise year on year if you look at the numbers, standard cost increases. Plus we've added things like one-to-one programs that add to the electrical draw on the schools. We do have many teachers and staff who use things like air purifiers now to draw power post-COVID, things like that that are factors in that. So some other major drivers we're looking at, health insurance is always a factor. Right now, we don't have a final number from our health insurance provider. I usually estimate anywhere from 6 to 9%. I'm hoping we're going to keep it at no more than 7% this year. But once we have actual numbers, we will input that into the budget. Hopefully, we won't be more than 7%. We can use that to bring down our estimate a little bit. Our COLA is across the board. We negotiate contracts in the middle of some of the biggest inflation going on, and we negotiate most of our contracts to be within the 3% range. So, we're looking at COLAs across the board that are, not outrageous, but they're a little higher than they may have historically been due to the environment. Most of our offsets are flat or decreasing. So when we talk about Chapter 70, you'll see a slide on that later. Many of our grants are flat. Our option to utilize things like school choice is flat. A big portion of our funding is flat, which means that if we're going to pass numbers on to our towns, they're going to pick a larger proportion of any increases we have. And you'll see that I have a sort of a dynamic example in the very next slide. The Chapter 74 example, looking at West Springfield. I don't believe West Springfield is an apples to apples comparison, but I think it's a reasonable numbers comparison to look at. West Springfield has maintained enrollment over the years. They've had a small decline in enrollment over the past 14 years, of only about 100 students. Hamden-Wilbraham has had a decline in enrollment of almost 800 students. That is harrowing, but I think, as you all know, our costs are not linear. They're very step variable. They're very invested in capital. We can have 100 students leave this district tomorrow and not be able to eliminate a single classroom. So, there's some number games there. There are some opportunities. So when we look at, they certainly have a higher low-income population. They certainly have had we've both had some changes in our low income, which are factors. But to compare, West Springfield has gone from $16 million in Chapter 70 funding to $35 million in Chapter 70 funding in that time with no change to their base numbers. So they've had significant increases year on year. I think last year they had a 7.5% increase to the Chapter 70. Some of that is normal increases to Chapter 70 coupled with some need-based increases. Fair enough. In that same time, we have seen an increase in Chapter 70 of $901,790, and you can see the net difference. So West Springfield has had a 53.61% increase, while we've had a 7.46% increase over 14, 15 years. So that comes out to about 0.5% per year in a good year. So the difference, if we have a 2% budget, our towns end up having to pick up the difference on that amount. So challenging. Then some other factors in our budget goes to economically disadvantaged students. I think statewide, the numbers of economically disadvantaged students has risen. That's no secret. This is a slide I've provided in the past couple of years, so I don't think it's new to most of you. But if you look at, over this time as our Chapter 70 money has been declining, our low-income student numbers have been increasing. I think in past years, I've shared some research that shows that your average low-income student comes with about 35% additional cost per student. So as we're looking at those numbers and we're not seeing increases in Chapter 70 and our low-income numbers are increasing, it puts further stress on our resources. Next slide, please. So regional transportation. I have some numbers here. I'm not going to dwell on the numbers. The big thing I'm going to dwell on is the variance in the reimbursement percentages, and this is highly challenging for budget reasons. Regardless of what this number is, any person working on a budget would much prefer to see stable numbers. Nonetheless, the initial commitment to regionalization was 100% when it was enacted. I think we've argued that year in and year out. I think what we would really like to see with our legislator present is consistency to the number. So going from 71% up to 96.21%, fantastic. We were excited to get that surprise. But then bringing it back down to what was 85% this year is challenging, right? You start to expect that you might get more and you're hopeful, and then the money goes away. So it's very hard. I find myself having to budget less and less to be safe rather than rolling the dice with what that number might be. Moving on, we get to our sort of final budget as we're looking. So these numbers, you'll see how our budget feeds to the assessments and how things like our flat Chapter 70 and other factors impact what we end up having to assess back to our towns. So you'll see in fiscal 22, we had a 2% increase to our budget, and our net assessments increased by 2.91%, almost 3%. So because of our flat revenues in other areas, our towns had to pick up an additional full point on behalf of the district. Last year, we had a bit of a tighter budget, we used, I believe, more B&D to help cover some of the shortfalls, but we were at 1.39% net. And our net assessments to the towns ended up being 2.68%. I think some of that had to do with the erratic nature, again, of transportation reimbursement. So we took transportation reimbursement down, requiring more of an assessment from the towns. And right now, as of putting this slide together, our initial budget stands at 6.02%. We received some inputs from some of our other partners, LP Beck, who does our transportation, and some of our special education and occupational services, that is bringing it down a little below 6, or at about 5.7%. I know that's not an exciting amount, but it's something at the moment, and I play a game of just continuing to pick away the budget as much as I can. Those of you who sort of followed me with budget, it's just pick and pick and pick from a certain point. But if we were to send those 6%, that 6% increase over to the towns, we would be proposing a 9.5% assessment based on last year's numbers. And inflation, inflating Chapter 70 by traditional amounts, so that 0.5%. I can't predict some of the other things, so I'm using prior year's numbers in items that We also have some challenges with how those assessments play out. So that 9.5% assessment, if number shifts continue, which they are, and minimum local contribution shifts continue, Wilbraham will pick up a much bigger piece of that, as they have for the past 5 years, 6 years. So we've had a shift of a total of 5% assessed towards Wilbraham based on the assessment method. You know, that's sort of a fault of the assessment method. One of the challenges, we had a big shift in minimum local contribution a few years ago, and Wilbraham actually had to pick up a much bigger piece of the burden based on that. And so one of the interesting things is since then, I've tried to get estimates from DESI. I believe they have all the data available to at least provide an estimate on minimum local contribution expectations of the towns, but they're not able to provide that. So in terms of what I'm working with now, I'm working with last year's minimum local contribution shifts. So another challenge to how we budget, if even the percents or how that plays out is calculated sooner, it would help us prepare our towns, prepare our budget. But right now, we're waiting for the governor's budget that may not come out until whenever, which is challenging. DESI did provide school districts with a method to estimate their own Chapter 70 this year. So, so that they sent information to 400 different school districts to allow them to individually calculate their Chapter 70. It's great for school districts that aren't in a hold harmless situation, who might be able to imagine they're going to get a substantial increase in Chapter 70. We are not, so that's a pointless exercise to us. But it also came with many, many caveats, so DESI wouldn't stand behind any figures that we were provided. Just you know, getting some sort of percentage or estimates out of DESI, holding everything even to last year would be a significant coup to many school districts. Again, wouldn't impact us, but having hundreds of school districts fluttering around with random spreadsheets to try to figure this out and no confidence that the data that they're providing is accurate, that becomes challenging. So we'll jump to the next slide. So as we get into budget, we also have capital planning considerations. I believe each town has at least our 10-year capital plan. Wilbraham has our town worksheets, so we've sent those over to the town for them to consider on a capital basis. And we are working, we've been back and forth with the town of Hamden a little bit in terms of what they specifically need. We're happy to provide that. I'm happy to say we are finishing our Community Preservation Act requests to our towns for some playground equipment that is ADA compliant. So we're excited about that a little bit. But then we do have the shared capital needs of Minnechaug and district-wide needs. This is a list that I've shared, again, part of the 10-year capital plan as part of the budget process. These are outside of the sort of baseline operational budget, and these are items that we need to look at. This does not mean that every one of these items needs to go back to the town, but these are capital needs of Minnechaug. And we may explore a couple different ways of paying for some of these items. But at present, they're on the table. So for example, as we talk about camera system upgrades, the former governor did have on the table a grant that he was allegedly working on for security upgrades to school districts. That is something we might have been able to use for this, but that seems to have been sort of has gone to the wayside with the change in administration. So if there were any ability to revisit that, that school security grant, that would be a significant opportunity. Next slide. Finally, as we have a legislator here, we've got one.
And two legislators.
Oh, I'm sorry. So we've got a couple. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry. We, in going through grants with DESI this year, I came upon these special support earmarks that I had never seen before. These are earmarked grants that are each made up of dozens of different earmarked projects for various school districts. Some of them include money towards a turf field. Some of them include mental health supports, which we've been told we needed to fund out of our ESSER grant. Some of them include classroom computers, which we funded largely one-to-one program out of our ESSER grant and other resources. I guess the question is, how do we get on these grants? This is something, I've been doing this for 10 years. I've never heard of a magic earmark grant that we were able to be part of. This is a mix of, I think there are grants that go out to needy school districts. This is a mix of affluent and economically disadvantaged districts. Wellesley's on this list. I mean, if you know Wellesley's financial situation, I believe their OPEB is fully funded at this time, but they need money on earmark grants. Again, a turf field, I'm not sure what that has to do with education. I sure would have appreciated money towards our turf field. That would have been great. So, we're kind of in this place where I've gone back in time and looked up some of these earmark grants, and apparently they've been going on since 2021. And I've never heard of them, and no one in the district has heard of them. We'd like an opportunity to be considered.
Since the state kind of goes on beyond 84. So, said especially since our state continues beyond 84.
Right.
It does?
So next
Well,
slide.
to us it does.
Oh, and thank you, we're done. So I'll let you guys get back to the regular agenda. This is a bit of a precursor for the overall conversations around these items, and I'll let the chair take over.
Does anyone have any questions for Aaron regarding any of the items on this presentation?
Aaron.
So everyone who has a speaker, if you wish to speak, there's a button at the front. Keep your question, just speak into the microphone so everyone can hear.
Yeah, if you have a red circle, there's a button right in the front that says push, so it turns green so you can talk.
Is it begin with a P?
You're good.
Okay. Why does a low-income student cost 35% more?
Say what?
Why does a low-income student cost 35% more?
Needs. Many low-income students don't have access to preschool, for example. Many low-income students have parents who both work more frequently and don't have enough time to spend reading to their children. Some of the resources allow them. Affluent families may have money to pay for private tutors and things like that when their children struggle. Whereas students who are economically disadvantaged may not have that luxury.
And can I just make one comment about the earmarks?
Mm-hmm.
You need to ask. Our legislative delegation has been fantastic to Hamden every time we've asked for anything. We've got $1.3 million for a sidewalk and $540,000 for windows and $100,000 to cut down trees. So there they are, write a little note and ask.
If I'd known that, we might have asked for $1.2 million for a lighting system.
Well, it was easy to find the school tonight my way over. I just followed the star.
Right. I have to laugh to keep from crying some days over that. But,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Energy costs. Does Hamden-Wilbraham utilize LPVC for energy costs for the bulk purchasing and locking in rates at certain levels? I know when I was on LPVC's board, Ludlow would lock in energy rates there.
Yep.
Was there any consistency or spikes going through them if you utilize them or any kind of group purchase?
I know they do oil, which we don't use.
Okay.
Do they
You
use
just
it?
make sure you do electricity every 3-year contract.
Okay.
Through-year
Fair enough,
contract with them. Was that locked in, or was it locked in at a certain rate? Yeah. Okay.
We also receive solar credits that are substantial. Yeah.
I do have something here. I don't know if of course, Bruce Adams with State Rep Angel Pupulo's office. But Rep Pupulo did file an amendment to the budget, $350,000 for the booster club for the turf field. And we Rep voted in favor of that also. So I do want to let you know that $350,000 was given to the booster for the turf for the athletic field.
Fair enough.
Do you have a date on that?
It was amendment to H 5007, which is amendment to the budget.
It might not have been in the line items that you had here. There are different chunks of funding in different areas. And just to that point on the earmarks, I mean, we were in, so just so you know a little bit of history of this, you know, you go back to the last recession, 2008 or 2009, a legislator, especially on the rep side, would be lucky if they got $20,000 for something. Because of federal dollars coming in through ARPA and the two bills that we did last session having to deal with ARPA, plus revenues over projections right now, there are a lot more different earmarks that are in there. I mean, clearly, when you look at, you know, this page over here, there are also other funding sources that go to certain things. And thanks, Bruce, for mentioning the turf field for the booster club. So there's different pockets of funding that's in each budget cycle. And, you know, depending if you're doing a supplemental budget or other areas, there are opportunities. But I think from our perspective as legislators, you have to tell us what you need. And for us to include any of these items, whether that's, you know, on the House side or on the Senate side, our kind of crunch time for the House side is right around April. For the Senate side, it's right around May. And so when you look at timing for new Governor Healy's House 1, because it's a new administration coming on in, House 1 will likely be filed the FY24 budget, likely in March because they just took office. So that was the same that was followed under Governor Baker, both his times, both his, his first time taking office. It was just with the governor today and the lieutenant governor, they were over in Ludlow, and so they were anticipating March timeframe. How we build out our FY24 budget is predicated on consensus revenue numbers. And there's actually going to be a meeting next Tuesday between co-chaired by the co-chairs of the House and Senate Ways and Means Committee to reach that consensus number. And once we get that consensus number, then the governor and both chambers can begin to build out their FY24 budget to see where the estimations are for FY24 for revenue. So just on timeline for us, and as you're making requests, you know, we would appreciate as early of a heads up as humanly possible. So particularly if the governor's budget is filed in March, you know, if we can have a short time frame on there of getting us your requests going into April and May, it's helpful for us.
So would an email from me tomorrow be adequate?
Tomorrow would be perfect.
Tomorrow, fantastic.
How about tonight?
So to that point though, for years, I've been on the school committee now for 4 years, and every year we've asked why we can't get 100% of what was promised to us for transportation reimbursement. We've had the representatives come, we've said the same thing about we promised 100% reimbursement. Okay, we'll do our best. We've now provided you with a scale so you can see that there's never been a consistent number. So I mean, if they're not going to give us 100%, can they give us a consistent 95% every year? Why can't we should have to tell you every year that we want that 100% reimbursement if it was promised to us.
Mm-hmm. Just so you know, I'm part of the regional transportation caucus in the legislature. I know Rep Pupulo, Rep Ash, and myself at Bahar. I was 12 years on the school committee, president of the School Committee Association. One of the #1 asks we always had was 100% reimbursement because that's what we were promised. And when we, looking back at FY21, I think it was, when we had, it was kind of pandemic timing on there, we came the closest to getting towards that. Last year, I know that from FY22 to FY23, it was level funded. And I was on an amendment to increase that funding to meet that level of commitment that was promised. I know the two reps that represent this school district are also always on it. The problem is that a majority of people in the legislature don't represent a regional school district. And that is a problem year in and year out. So I think it's important that not just us that represent regional schools, so I didn't represent a regional school in the House, I still advocated and signed on for that amendment because we have school districts in our area that are dependent on that regional school transportation. So you know, I'm actually filing a piece of legislation on the policy side this session having to do with looking at our transportation systems and how we work them here in Massachusetts. Luckily, Hampton-Wilbraham participates in LPBC, which has mitigated some of the increases. If you look at other school districts in Massachusetts, including Worcester Public Schools, in any given year, they can see a 25% increase of their transportation costs when they're going out to bid with private companies. So, you know, Hampton-Wilbraham tends to be in a better position than other school districts who go out to private bid, but the whole transportation structure here in Massachusetts needs to be looked at because it's not meeting the needs of school districts, including the funding side.
No, I mean, and to that point though, Worcester has the ability to go private in that like they can afford to buy their own buses now. That's what direction they've gone. We don't have that ability. So I don't even know that it's fair to compare municipal schools to regional schools, and if that means that there has to be policies that are separate, then maybe that's really what needs to happen. I mean,
Well, that was the point that I was going to bring up is a regional school district. Yeah, like in order to get more money, you got to go back to the taxpayers and ask them for more. So, you know, when we're trying to set a budget, it's very difficult to know where you're going to be, especially with fluctuations in regional transportation.
and maybe there's an opportunity, maybe there's an opportunity for the earmark to create, you know, that opportunity for regional transportation that's just for regional transportation, because you know how the schools are impacted by it.
So listen, you know, transportation, it hits us hard, and everybody knows that. But there's other things in transportation that also hit us hard. Every child is required to have a seat on the bus. So if the child never takes the bus, we're still paying for that seat for the bus because we are required to have that seat for the bus. If a child decides that they're carpooling in with their friends and they're driving it or walking in or whatever, we still have to have a seat for them on that bus. That is a cost. If you can help free us up from some of those requirements too. I'm not saying we want to do this, but we can't charge bus fees or anything like that, which municipalities can, I believe, right? So that's another thing that ties us. Not that we would do that, but you know, in this era that we're in right now, we have to find a way of bringing more money in so that we don't have to cut the things that are important to us. The next thing that I really want to talk about is special ed. There are challenges with special ed. Hampden-Wilbraham Regional School District does a really great job with special ed. And we have become a lighthouse in the stormy seas, you know. You know, if you can get to Hampden-Wilbraham, you know, then your children will be taken care of. And we have seen the increases in the costs. So our towns are disproportionately carrying the burden, which I believe that should be carried by the state for those most vulnerable among us that have these special ed needs. You know, so instead it's falling on our district, and as you just saw there, it's an increase of $830,000 this year from last year. And yes, we are going to serve our special needs children. I mean, that is what we do. That's what we're known for. But it's disproportional, and it's just not right that we do a good job, so we're carrying that burden. And just to tell you, now, I understand that there's only a certain amount of money. I know the towns have been incredibly generous in giving us funds, and I want to thank you all, and thank you all for coming here as well. There's only a certain amount of money that the towns have that they can share with us. You know, and I hear that the billionaire's tax that generated some money, I guess around $1 billion, that looks like it's now going to be going to higher education rather than to, you know, high schools, elementary, I mean, where we need it. It's resorted that I've actually started buying some lottery tickets, okay? Because I think that is our best bet of getting these things funded. And when lottery tickets are the best way of getting things funded, no offense to the towns, you just don't have the funds. And no offense to the state, because you have other priorities, I guess, than the kids that are in our public schools. But it's like, you know, as long as Mrs. Kennedy agrees, if I ever do hit, the money will come to Hampden-Wilbraham. But I tell you that is not That is not a business plan that anyone should be following, and that shouldn't be our best line of generating funds.
So going back to the special, sorry.
Dr. Crumble was reading.
Oh, sure.
Sure.
Sorry, Roundtable.
That's okay. Following along on Member Kennedy's comments, and also cognizant of the point you brought up about representation of districts that happen to be regional districts, I wanted to sort of move on to some things that really affect all districts and maybe therefore might have more impetus. So first of all, I do want to talk about the 14% OSD increase in out-of-district tuition. Now that was something that OSD felt was essential for the viability of private special education schools. That given the inflationary pressures they were looking at, they needed a minimum of 14% increase in order to survive. And what I would just say is every public school is facing the same inflationary pressures and more. As a former special ed director, I can tell you private special ed schools don't have anything like the infrastructure costs that public school districts have. They don't have anything like the personnel costs that public schools have. And so if 14% was needed for them, I really think 14% is needed for us. So that's just something I'd love to hear reactions to. And the other thing is fair share amendment. So I remember a rainy day several years ago where Laura Fallon and Mayor Narkowitz and I got into a truck and we drove to Boston for a hearing. We waited for hours to give testimony where we said the SOA funds needed to be approved because districts were so underfunded. As you might recall, that was in part because of the Foundation Commission study, which showed that schools are being underfunded by about $1 billion a year. Superintendents actually thought that it was $2 billion a year, but the state estimate was at least $1 billion. And that was passed, and none of the money from that ever flowed to the district that I was representing at the time, or this district. My question to you is, how can we assure that the Fair Share Amendment, which was also passed in order to resolve the underfunding problem, does not get swallowed up in other things such as infrastructure or higher ed? So thoughts on those things?
A couple of things. First, starting out, I advocated for the SOA as well as a school committee member, testified at that hearing. You know how much Ludlow got in that? Very similar percentage increase that Hamden Wilbraham received in Chapter 70. Majority of that went to in places like Springfield, Chicopee, Holyoke, which were woefully underfunded for many years and deserved to get the funding. One piece of the SOA that I think is so essential to point out is that we waited nearly 30 years to crack open that formula again. And the plan for the SOA was a 7-year plan to get those school districts like Springfield and Chicopee up to a level of funding where they didn't have the capacity to tax or utilize the property tax. So we're in I believe we're in year 4 of that plan right now. And what was in that legislation as well is that we wouldn't wait another 30 years before we crack open the formula. And so what we've been working on right now in the legislature is to ensure that school districts who didn't see the benefits of the SOA, places like Hamden Wilbraham, Ludlow, Belchertown, East Long Meadow, that they get their fair share next time that the formula is opened up. So we're on year 4 of that 7-year plan of pumping in significant dollars to those needy school districts. But we're not going to wait another 30 years again until we open up that line item. So putting that aside now and then transitioning over to kind of the special ed increases, just to the point that you made, Sean, before. I'm working very closely with MASS right now on a bill along with the School Committee Association that is looking at the long-term health of special education in Massachusetts. It's not sustainable. When you see, double-digit increases, percentage increases, school districts can't afford them. My dad's a teacher in Ludlow. The amount of needs of students post getting back from the isolation of the pandemic, those special ed costs are going through the roof right now. So working with MASS and MASC, we're working on a bill right now that we're filing before the deadline tomorrow that will look at the long-term health of special education because it's not working. You know, special ed circuit breaker, even when it's fully funded, doesn't make up the cost differential for school districts that are facing these increased costs year in and year out, and the cost of sending out-of-district placements that are going through the roof, not just, you know, the cost to attend there, but also the transportation costs are going up for out-of-district placements as well. Those are all things that are cost drivers for school districts. Looking at the fair share amendment, the coalition that was built together to pass the fair share amendment, which the estimations right now are between, you know, $1 billion and $2 billion. We'll see after Tuesday's consensus revenue estimates how much we should actually anticipate of fair share funding that will be estimated for the FY24 budget. But there are many competing interests. You know, to be perfectly honest, you know, Sean, you mentioned higher ed. Early childhood education is another piece of it. Infrastructure dollars when it goes to it, because how fair share was built was, you know, education and transportation. Once you start dividing that pot of funds up, you know, you're not talking a significant amount of money that's going to go into necessary areas that we want to invest in. My big thing is making sure, to your point earlier, talking about we get our fair share, it's about regional equity, making sure that Western Massachusetts gets our fair share of funding and that the transportation dollars aren't all soaked up by the MBTA, which none of us really utilize in this part of the state. So that there's that part of it. K-12 education combined with early childhood education combined with public higher education, which are also woefully underfunded. I mean, public higher education, per pupil spend for public higher education is 48th in the nation right now when you compare us to the other states. That means the students that graduate here from Hampton-Wilbraham are facing increased costs, whether they're going to a community college or a four-year institution. You know, 2/3 of our graduates here are going to go to one of those schools, whether it's a community college or a four-year institution. And those costs for them are unsustainable over time. Early childhood education, if you talk to anybody, if you talk to your kindergarten teachers or your first grade teachers, the more that you invest in early childhood education, the more you save on the K-12 side in the spending that you have. So I'm just saying that we'll see what the consensus revenue estimates come in for, but there are many competing interests for those dollars, and the coalition that was built together had interest for all of them.
Thank you.
So we talked a lot about special education. Could I maybe suggest that Gina give us some sort of real-world experiences within the district as far as, you know, what we're talking about in terms of, you know, the gravity of the cost increases as well as, you know, the expansion of services.
So I was going to talk about circuit breaker, but I think Aaron did a nice summary of the costs of the reimbursement that we get from circuit breaker. One thing that was not mentioned are the types of costs that are covered by circuit breaker reimbursement. So we have a lot of kids that are in out-of-district placement. So the three types of out-of-district placements, we have approved private schools. An example of that would be Valley West. So we're able to get reimbursement because the cost of that placement exceeds the $49,000. Unapproved private programs, we have very few kids placed in those, but that's the second type of out-of-district program. And the third is a public program, which is a program like LPVAC, where we would send them to IOP or train over at Brush Hill in West Springfield. The other thing that's covered is we incur a huge cost for out-of-district transportation. We have students that reside in Wilbraham that we have to transport all the way to Northampton for a placement at Cutchins, for example. And that is a huge expense. And when you think about how much we're incurring as far as the placement at Cutchins, the transportation every single day from Wilbraham to Cutchins, as an example, we're not getting a lot back because we're only getting back, like once you go per student, once you go beyond $49,494, we're getting reimbursed for only 75% of the excess, and then we don't get it until the next year. So we're also faced with students moving into our district that are unexpected costs. An example would be a student that maybe moves in, and if they move in prior to April 1st, we already did our budget. So we're going to get tagged with a placement that is
extremely costly, and we don't have it in our budget, and we won't get reimbursed for the next year, but we still have to pay for them for the entire school year without reimbursement. So we do have a lot of tricky situations where we have students that move in and their unanticipated costs. Even like when we accept a lot of school choice students, sometimes we don't know how much cost we're going to incur when they come into the district. So there are a lot of unexpecteds in special ed. And the other thing that we're able to get reimbursement for is if we have students that are really high needs and maybe they have medical needs and they need a nurse paraprofessional with them all day, every day. So that is going to take us beyond the $49,000, but we're still incurring a huge cost for each of those students that has significant needs. So I'm happy to answer any specific questions, but an example of the cost increases, Bill, like that, we're talking about a 14% increase for all of the out-of-district placements, which is a huge amount when you think about the number of kids we have out of district. But not only is the cost of placement increasing by 14%, we just got notice from one of the schools there are 2 really high-need students that need one-to-one paraprofessional support. And we were incurring the cost of $33,000 for them to have a one-to-one. They just sent us notice that one-to-one para cost is going from $33,000 to $43,000, which is a 30% increase, which seems astronomical because we're not paying our staff more and we're not incurring that cost in district. So it just doesn't seem right that out of districts are able to charge that much more for services rendered.
And I think we talked the last time when we talked about out of district placements and the numbers comparatively over the years. You talked a little bit about that?
Sure. So I would say that right after, actually during COVID and soon after, we had an increase. And I spoke at the last budget meeting about this, that last year that we had an increase in diagnostic placements, where we would have to do an 8-week diagnostic placement for students who were demonstrating significant behavioral challenges. And when we send the students out, the difficulty with sending a student out for an 8-week diagnostic is that oftentimes due to the nature of the program that we're sending them to, a lot of times it ends up that at the end of the diagnostic period, if the student's doing well, we end up having them stay in the placement because we determine that that's the structure and the support that student needs, and then that becomes an out-of-district cost that we're incurring on a yearly basis because we end up having to place them in that program to meet their needs.
Probably worth adding unilateral placements. So there are agencies such as DCF that will unilaterally place a student that has nothing to do with their special education needs, but rather their family situation. And again, I believe as a district we want to support the whole child in every aspect of that child. But when a unilateral placement where we could support their academic needs in district is unilaterally placed by an agency like DCF, we lose all control.
So I'm going to give an example of that. So if DCF placed a student in a residential program and it was a decent distance away, we're not able to provide the educational services. So we kind of have to cost share with DCF, and that student who their residential placement changes to, say, Devereaux, for example, we're paying the cost of the educational placement of the school associated with Devereaux right on campus. So that's, again, a costly thing for us.
And that's frequently in the $75,000 range, just to give a perspective.
So I would say that well done is better than well said. And we sit here every year and have the exact same conversation. I think about the only change on this agenda, if we were to look at a year ago, is probably Aaron's title and FY 23-24. Otherwise, it's the same agenda. It's the same conversation. It is clear that you can articulate the issues that we're facing, but what are we going to do about it? Because we can sit here and we can say, okay, there are things that we need to do, right? We can, and we have to your email the other day, we have to look at our bus routes, right? We are inefficient with the way that we transport our students. So yes, we should see some reductions there, but we're talking about $1 here, $1 there, compared to a $55, $58 million budget. And what happens in these small towns is you pit department against department fighting for those dollars. So we can sit here and go through all the ways that we spend money, and I'm going to look at the legislative contingent here, but it really comes down to you. So we heard you say, the problem is not enough people understand regional districts. So what's going to be done differently so that we don't have the same conversation next year and you say, we understand it, we put it forward, but nobody supported it? Because this is going to continue until something fundamentally changes with either the way we receive our representation or the way we receive our funding.
I can assure you that I had the same conversation in 2009 when I first got on the school committee. And the thing is right now, the difference that I would see, I mean, there are a couple of differences. I mean, if you went to like a Springfield, Chicopee, or Holyoke 14 years ago, before the SOA, it would be even weaker. Since the SOA, those districts are in far better shape, so there have been changes there. When we're looking at issues like special education right now, that's why we're filing this bill, because it hasn't been filed before. We haven't cracked open the cost drivers in special education and rethink the way we're doing it. Looking at Chapter 70, you know, before, we were having those same conversations in 2009 as they would have in the late 90s or the early 90s when when education reform came in the early 90s. You know, I can't say that I have a magic wand or any of us have a magic wand in the legislature and wave it, and we can get resources, you know, out of thin air. But what we can do is speak as one voice for these issues, and that's what we will try to do. That's what we're committed to doing. I mean, when you look at things like regional school transportation that goes directly to the school district, you know, building the case on there for people who don't represent regional school districts, which I didn't until, you know, just in January before, but I advocated, I signed on to it because I understood the issue. I think reaching out to folks and making sure we build that coalition of support so we can get to that 100% is something that I think is changing now because people are beginning to understand the issue because we continue to advocate. But it's also on you. You know, when I go to the State House, as a school committee member, I would see maybe one or two people, maybe Sean over there. You got to beat on our doors. You got to talk to us. You got to, you know, meet us in that budget season. You got to make those asks and those requests so we hear from you. And you know, legislating is a tough business because you know when you look at sheer numbers, us in the Western Mass delegation, you added the 4 counties together, we're smaller than the Boston delegation proper. So, you know, sheer numbers, you know, we got to stick together and advocate as a whole, but we need you to advocate as well and talk to folks and continue to raise these issues to us in order to, you know, kind of build that groundswell of support. You know, when we go into budget season, I mean, we all say, all of us, we all say that K-12 education is usually number 1 or number 2 on our priority list. There are a lot of competing interests at the legislative level. It's about a two-way street. It's about conversations. It's about attending meetings like this. You know, Representative Pupolo, Representative Ash, myself, want to be accessible to you folks as we move forward, especially as we get into budget season. So, you know, we'll be there advocating, but we need you to advocate and build that groundswell of support with other school committee members across Massachusetts so they're knocking on their legislators' doors, through MASS, through the special education advocates, so we can make sure that we raise these issues and have them on the front burner.
So to that point, regional transportation is frankly not a massive quantity, right? Because a commitment was made, a commitment should be honored. However, if there's going to be a focus, I would look very hard at special education, Chapter 70. So using the example of West Springfield that Aaron shared, right, our per student expenditure is about a $900 difference between the two schools. We spend $900 more. However, if you look at the burden on the taxpayer, using the FY22 budget, in a $65+ million budget that West Springfield has compared to our, call it $50 million, the taxpayers of Hamden Wilbraham pay roughly $38,200,000 compared to, in West Springfield, $29,768,000. So that's what really needs to be changed, as opposed to putting the energy behind regional transportation. Be great, but small numbers compared to the numbers that we're sharing there.
And the special ed side, I'll share with your superintendent and with the school committee members to build up finally working with MASS and MESC to crack open the special ed drivers are really kind of circling it. But it's, you're right, it's chapter 70 and it's special ed.
So I think Patrick's point is well taken. When we look at Springfield, Holyoke, Chicopee, one of the things that we're not looking at is the percent of the minimum local contribution that these towns are putting into their budget. We're over 30%, I believe. And if you look at our total school budget, 72% of it is funded through assessments. That's not the case in Springfield. It's not the case in Holyoke. So we can talk about, shuttling money into, the Student Opportunity Act to fund these districts, but at the same time, their taxpayers are not paying anything above what they're mandated to pay. So that's a big point that we need to understand is that, the taxpayers in these two towns have made a commitment to education. And I think that it's important that we recognize the struggle and the sacrifice. Patrick's point also is well taken in that if we look at the total budget increase for this year, we're looking at about $3 million, which is about double what we normally look at for a budget increase. A third of that is special education. A third. So if you took those special education costs out, you're talking about a much, a much easier pill to swallow. So looking at that and understanding that, the cost drivers for us, we're at a precipice only because, we're taxing people to the hill to fund these schools. And, it's difficult when you see money being invested on the state side, but then it's going to municipalities where their contribution above MLC is basically nothing. Sorry to put you on the spot. There's a lot of stuff here, but you've been on the school committee for 12 years, so this is nothing new to you.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at, urban areas, they don't have the tax base that other communities have. They simply don't. And when we looked at, systematically the underfunding, you want to look at, if you look at, this is the starkest thing. When I got on the school committee in Ludlow, our economic disadvantaged student population of 15% is now 40%. There are costs when you have economically disadvantaged students. Springfield's at 8%. There are a lot of costs that go in, as we were saying before, to economically disadvantaged students. So those are some of the cost drivers in those communities. The cost of educating students tends to be a lot higher, and they simply don't have, because of their level of poverty, the income coming in to pay for it. And so that's why the SOA is focused in on those.
And the last thing I would say, and I remember years ago when I first started on the school committee, I believe Mr. Ducey had sent a letter with the superintendent talking about the unfunded mandates from the state. And those are absolutely, those are killer, because it's basically telling us we have to provide a service, we have to provide, some type of instructional program, but there's no money for it. And so what we're doing is we're chiseling money away from general education and, putting it towards, those mandates that we have to pay for. And that's a big deal. The last thing, Gina, I just wanted to ask you, the one question that a person asked me before is the percent increase in the number of students that we have on IEP or 504. I know, I'm sorry, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but if I remember correctly, those numbers have gone up.
They have gone up. So we have at least 480 students on IEPs. The number of referrals for evaluations has gone up substantially as well since COVID.
So when you get an IEP, all of the services that are mandated on that IEP have to be provided, correct?
Correct.
We're legally obligated to do that lest we face some sort of reprisal from the advocate or the family.
Right.
So when we increase the number of IEPs, Obviously, the number of dollars that are going to be corralled into those IEPs is going to increase. Obviously, it takes money away from general education.
Right. And the number of intensive needs students that we have has increased as well. The need for sub-separate programs within the district so that we're not sending kids out has increased. We have a substantially higher number of kids receiving services from programs like the IRR. Right now, we have 10 students assigned to the IRR program at Mile Tree, the intensive resource classroom, which is a lot.
If I can just dovetail on unfunded mandates and things like that, if you could impress upon legislature the burden of paperwork. So we get exactly $0 from the Student Opportunity Act. Yet every year we have to provide a report on how we're spending those $0. We basically play a fill-in-the-blanks process of programs that we're already funding, that we're paying for, and we submit that report. It's meaningless. I don't think it provides the state with any data. You know, I can offer another that doesn't directly impact us. Municipal school districts still have to report ridership as if they were getting transportation reimbursement. It's insane. They don't get transportation. Why should they have to report ridership? Just, they're paying the cost. That's it. Why should, I understand why I have to, but I don't understand why they have to. So just two examples where just a small tweak to legislature could save some of us the time and the effort that goes into all of these things that we don't get funded for.
Yeah. Have you done an internal calculation of the costs of unfunded mandates?
Are you asking how many times I've done that?
Yeah. I know. What is your
I
number?
can tell you, I get asked that by every legislator
Yeah.
I talk to.
Okay.
We provide it and nothing happens.
Yeah. What, do you have a number? Do you have a number, man hour, money?
I don't have
Okay.
that at the moment, but
Yeah.
we can work on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I can.
And MESS, I believe, and the school business officers also have, I think, a report that was done, dusted off maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that estimated the cost for school districts, and certainly after the SOA, that's kind of gone up over time. And so, you know, looking at it, and to be perfectly honest, a lot of times, you know, DESI takes on a life of its own. And, you know, absent the legislature kind of clawing back from DESI will do what they want. And we've seen that time and time again, is that DESI, without anything that's ever written into law, will create unnecessary regulations and unnecessary paperwork that continues, like you said before. Why are you spending your time and energy, you know, sending to DESI information about what little money you get from Chapter 7? It takes on a life of its own.
And in so much as things like, I'm sure you're referring to the end of your report, I mean, you know, in so much as that's useful, I'm happy to do it. That's not a question. You know, but when I get $0 to report on the $0 I get, it just seems meaningless and futile. And just thinking of that cognitively when these things happen.
Can I have a turn?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question, I guess, is more towards what's more important, pre-K, K through 12, or higher education? Because if you're not doing general education, there is no higher education. You don't have kids going to college. You don't have kids understanding why they should be going to college, but knowing that they're going to just have to go out to the workforce. So we can't fund the education to get them to that next level. How do you expect us to make this, give them better opportunities?
You could say the same about early childhood education. You look at, you know, K through 12.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, you talk to any early childhood educator, you talk to a kindergarten teacher or a first grade teacher, the quality of the program that the students are coming in and the reading level of the student coming in at that grade will cost the school district even more money over time. And so investing, you know, they've done this, and you can look at Mass Taxpayer Foundation, you can look at anywhere. You know, investing in any of those 3 levels of education are actually long-term good for the growth and the health of the Commonwealth. So I don't think it's a question of this one, that one, or the other one. It's we've got to raise all of those 3 segments because they're all essential for our Commonwealth.
because it shouldn't be or, it should be and. But at the end of the day, if something continues to get a focus, how do you say, okay, so for a few years, let's not give that focus to higher education, let's look at giving it to early childhood. Because early childhood leads right into general education.
It's like a foundation. You don't
Yep.
have a house on there. If you don't have a proper foundation starting out with, then the whole house is going to be, you know, falling down. But if, you know, the roof is still leaky on there, you're going to have issues as well. So, point taken.
We do have David and Mike, who are our facilities folks here in the district. And we've got members of capital planning. Could we maybe have a little discussion about capital planning needs within the district here? And I can have you start it off, and then we can invite these gentlemen in to sort of, you know, have a conversation about, you know, what's coming down the road. This building is now, you know, 12 years old, and there's capital needs that are coming down. And again, as a regional school district, it's up to the taxpayers to fund this through the school budget. So as we go further along, capital needs are going to increase.
It's safe to say that one of our buildings is aging, and they're aging differently. We have doors and windows needs in 2 of our schools. Oh, I'm sorry. Some significant doors and windows needs in 2 of our schools. MSBA canceled the Rapid Accelerated program. Yes, sorry, I was thinking of the word. This year, so, you know, that's off the table. There's no way, you know, we believe our towns could do that, and possibly not with MSBA funds, so, you know, that came off the table. But this building at, you know, a little over 12 years old is starting to get a little long in the teeth. We have some needs that are coming up. The very first ones are some of the technology needs. Obviously, our lighting system had some challenges. But many of our IT items are coming of age. So we're replacing many of the switches and routers this year. Next year, we're looking at wireless access points. Those are all things that have an 8 to 10, give or take, year lifespan. And those are coming of age. But immediately following those items will be other items that maybe have a 15 to 20 year lifespan. We're looking at other items coming down the road, things like chillers and things like that. But I'll let Mike and Dave talk in a little more detail maybe about some of those items if they want.
Yes, the...
Turn your microphone. Yes. Press the button.
Yep.
we're trying to whittle away some of the older HVAC equipment that's been in these buildings forever and not providing the proper indoor air qualities that they really need. The Freons, R12s and
It's R22.
22s are no longer available, so we've got those onto the capital needs to try to increase the air qualities. Also, the backup generators have been a high priority for the school district for 20 years or more that I've been involved with capital and planning. And we just had an incident recently where we had a backup and we were almost at the verge of evacuating a building from a sewer system. And you got to keep your ejector pumps running to be able to get the solids and the sewers out of these tanks and into the sewer systems. Without backup powers, we can't do that. And then you got to get your students out of the buildings. It causes a lot of headaches. So the generators have always been a big part of what we've been trying to do, and hopefully at some point we can move forward with these backup generators because they're valuable in continuing education, keeping the walk-in freezer coolers going so you don't lose all those products, which we've had in the past from extended outages.
If I might add, special education to IEPs. We have AC, mini splits put into the rooms, so, we don't have a generator to back them up, kind of defeats the purpose of,
Now, looking at the roster of buildings that we have in our districts, with the exception of this school, I believe the newest school that was constructed was Wilbraham Middle School in 1968. And it goes backwards from there. I think Thornton Burgess was 67. I believe Mile Tree was 63. Can you guys talk a little bit about the capital needs for those buildings. As you get to basically 60 years old of seeing foot traffic of, 300 to 700 students a day for 180 days.
The Wilbraham Middle School is in dire need of windows and doors, unbelievable. I mean, we chip away at them, but it's a big cost item, and as Aaron has said, the accelerated repair program from the MSBA is stopped, because the costs of construction have gone up so much that what the core projects, the brand new schools or the renovated schools and everything, has been stopped to put those funds into the core projects. So we don't even have an opportunity. I mean, they're on our plans and everything, but they're very needy. They're in those projects there.
How many schools have generators?
Well, we have a generator at Sewell Road, but it only does backup lighting.
Okay.
It does nothing else. We have a generator at TWB that does backup lighting. We have a generator at Green Meadows that does the whole school. It's the only school. Minnetonka has a generator here that does maybe 45%. Does all your life safety things, your backup generators. It does cover our infrastructure for IT. It covers the energy management systems, the boiler, so if it's in the middle of the winter, you don't have your pipes freezing and stuff like that. So those are the current buildings with generators. Pardon? No.
To our legislation on the backup generators, so I do believe that Rep. Pupolo secured a $50,000 earmark for a backup generator for a yet-to-be-built senior center here in Wilbraham. So when we look at it, you're hearing the need for backup generators for buildings that we already own, that are up and running. It would be incredibly helpful to look for the earmarks to support that today, so we're not evacuating buildings and having to do things like that. So as you look at earmarks and when you think about it, I would keep in mind that there's already one that's been secured here in Wilbraham. It'd be really helpful if that is school.
To that point, capital is a lot easier to secure an earmark because it's one-time funding. Everything else that, you're coming back year after year. Capital tends to be the best area to offer them, especially because it's one time and has a shelf life of X amount of years.
So, as we've talked a little bit about the budget, I know the agenda set to end at 8:30, but I wanted to bring our finance folks in a little bit, and Kevin and then Carol and Doug. So looking at those assessment increases, if you can kind of just run through, because I know, Mark comes to our finance and operations subcommittee meetings, and we have discussions about, once you get done paying all the bills, how much money do you have for, discretionary expenses? And I'll have you talk about it, and then Doug and Carol can kind of chime in on it.
At least from the Wilbraham finance perspective, we have not really.
You just talk into your microphone, I can't hear you over here.
Yeah, just pull your microphone closer. Yeah.
At least from the Wilbraham, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
At least from the Wilbraham finance perspective, we have not gotten to the point where we're able to know what we've got left as far as, what we're going to be able to offer. We're very early in the budget cycle, so we're going to speak on what we know we'll have left.
No, I'm just saying historically, like when you get down to paying all the bills, how much, are we talking, $5 million of discretionary, or are we talking,
I mean, from a taxpayer and a finance perspective, there's not a discretionary dollar anywhere. Everything has to be spoken for and accounted for and planned for. We're not raising more than we need. We're not, squirreling it away. So there's not, as far as a discretionary, fund, left at the end of the day.
Yeah. Doug or Carol?
We're not, like Wilbraham, this is early for us in our process in terms of all the competing demands between the schools and all the other town departments. So, Doug and I have sat a little quietly the last few years because we know that the pendulum has swung toward the Wilbraham side, but we also know that that's an issue that we have to correct for the district and for both communities going forward. So, you know, that needs, I think, needs some attention at some point, the formula for the cost share within the district. But in terms of where we're at for FY '24, we're nowhere close to that.
Mark?
Yeah, if I can just add a few things to that. Historically, we've increased the budget for the school budget about $800,000 plus a year. So when we get a beginning number of like $3 million, which Wilbraham would probably bear about $2.4 million of that, we got a gigantic gap, of course. So it's a real problem. And we talk about this very, well, we haven't emphasized it enough, I don't think. The albatross is, well, one of the albatrosses, but a significant one, is the population change. The way it works is it's based on enrollment. Although our costs aren't necessarily based on enrollment. And so Wilbraham is now bearing about just over 80% of the budget. And I've been on finance for 20-some years in their house. And it's always at 75%. Oh, in the last 5-6 years, it's changed about 5%. That would probably equate to about $1.5 million. And we have to do something. I don't think this is a legislature issue, but we have to do something to figure out a better formula.
If I'm here, having heard from both towns and knowing sort of the financial dilemma they're in over a lot of this, I'd like to share that I'm on listservs with many other people who do what I do. We're not the odd man out this year. Numbers are 6 to 9% across the board with every other school district I talked to. I think there was one in the 5s. I mean, that's like the best I've seen. And just to not mince words, if something doesn't happen, there's going to be a statewide bloodletting, I mean, of school districts. Just plain and simple. I don't know what we're going to do.
So things that we can concentrate on in the district. Aaron, you had a conversation with LPVC about sort of the busing and talking about schools, and you want John to take that?
So that was actually something that I've been more involved with. Earlier this week, superintendents reviewed the LVPEC budget for the entire collaborative for FY24. One of the things I realized was the tremendous number of buses that our district is using. If I remember correctly, it was more than all of the buses provided by or used by Longmeadow, East Longmeadow, and Agawam combined. Part of that might be able to be resolved by going to some kind of a different structure, which is what I asked them to look at. So currently, we have 2 tiers. If we were to go to 3 tiers, you should be able to do it with fewer buses. It might also address the issue that for as long as I've been here, and I understand many years, the collaborative has not been able to get enough drivers for our routes. So if you could do it with fewer buses, you could save some money, and you might get better consistency. It would require us to make some adjustments, but I'm trying to get an estimate from them what that might look like and what any potential cost savings might be.
And going along with that, if we're talking about building utilization. Right now, we have a structure where we go every 2 years to a different building. And one of the limitations of that, obviously, is that if we look at the percent over planned occupancy of our elementary schools, specifically Mile Tree and Stony Hill, we're well over what the planned occupancy of those 2 buildings are. And so we're bumping up on that. At the same time, we are just around, I think, under 1,000 students here. And this building has an occupancy for 1,250, and it was as high as 1,350 when the building first opened. So I think if we can have a discussion maybe for a couple of minutes about what kind of options do we have. I know at the school committee level, we've talked about, last year we took, I think, 68 school choice students. And one of the things that we need to look at is how are we going to utilize this building going forward? Are we planning on taking another cohort of 68 students for school choice? One of the things we have to remember is that, we can get the numbers up in this school through school choice, but now you're going to run into a situation where 25, even 30% of your students live out of the two towns. So if anybody wants to kind of chime in on that.
Yeah, I want to just jump on something on what Bill said. So the school choice is $5,000 per student is what the fees are. And I learned from Mr. Boyd that when school choice started, how many ever years ago, it was $5,000 a student. So, I mean, if we could do something with those numbers as well, that would be helpful. I mean, yes, you know what our asks are, but there are ancillary things that we can do to help bolster everything.
I don't know if anybody has thoughts on that. Because that's going to be one of the budget, that's going to be one of the items that's going to come up on the budget this year is, you bring another 50 kids at 5,000 apiece, you're talking $250,000. So you're closing the gap. However, at the same time, I've often said it's really not just our decision at the school committee level, but the community level to decide, what we want our schools to look like, and whether or not we think that's a prudent way to move in terms of utilizing our space.
If I think school choice used strategically can be helpful at times, but I don't know the exact number. Maybe somebody in the room does. I think it costs us about $18,000 a year for every student we have. So if you're bringing in 5,000 to make, and costing $18,000, it's a short-term proposition.
For those in the room, the history behind it has always been that school choice was usually open just at the high school level, although we did open up some school choice positions at the elementary school level. But the idea behind it was basically to bring in enough students to kind of round up sort of class sizes in the high school without necessarily adding positions. And one of the things, again, we have to look at is that, if you bring in, let's say you bring in, 20 school choice kids at $5,000 a piece, it's $100,000. If you've got to open another classroom, well, you just basically obligated yourself to a teacher and benefits. So that $100,000 is dissolved. So I think in the time that I've been on the school committee, it's always been somewhere between 20 and 24 students each year that were taken in school choice. So, again, looking at our building utilization, and I think inviting in our facilities guys and our capital planning folks to be able to look at, what are the most viable buildings, what is it, and then using, Mrs. Curtin to look at, what's a viable structure in terms of education to be able to maximize the utilization of our buildings. Because we're, like I said, this is our newest, most technologically advanced building, but we're 300 kids short.
Which should be the work, right, that comes out of the strategic steering committee. So I think you heard from the townspeople on the needs and desires, and then it's creating a plan that supports the desires and needs that we have that make sense with the built environment that we have. Two quick things just from the legislative standpoint that would help. So we heard John speak about, and Bill right there, potentially reconfiguring our schools. One of the things that we've asked in the past is to change the CPA language so that we can use sidewalks, which right now you cannot have sidewalks under CPA. You can spend any time on Main Street here and see the number of people that drive to Park and Wolverhampton United to walk up and down the sidewalk. So I hard time saying that's not recreation, but that would allow us to reduce the number of buses total and not pay for it out of district or taxpayer money. The other one, when you look at the built environment and our carbon neutral goals, you can't get there from electric buses and some of the things that we're doing. However, you can from smarter construction. So I think buildings typically use somewhere around 40% of all global energy consumption, responsible for 30+% of greenhouse gas emissions. When we look at the MSBA to that conversation earlier, and we're a great example in these two communities, there should be an MSBA program for all municipal construction and not just schools. And so what that does is it forces at a senior center, at a police, fire, whatever that may look like. So when we look at potential needs, that will then help save the amount of capital funding that we have for the existing buildings that we have to take care of and maintain. So something that I'd like to see a look into changing.
And you know, looking at MSBA, you know, a cent of every one of our sales tax goes to the MSBA. I mean, there's guaranteed funding flying at a port, but that's shrinking year in and year out. And when you look at the MSBA, you know, not being, you know, basically shutting down the accelerated repair program because they don't have the money. I was on for the city of Chicopee for one of their elementary schools, and they basically said on there that Brockton High School, which is the largest high school, I think in New England, if they
decided in Mississippi, I believe.
Yeah, it's massive. They did that one project, every cent of the MSBA dollars would go to just that one project for 1 year. So that pot of funds is shrinking each and every year. We are doing a bill in this, you know, looking at expanding the MSBA to include collaborative access as well, because collaboratives, if they're building a new facility right now, or if they're renovating a facility, they just bill it back to the district, which is costing, you know, all the 7 members of the LPDC, it's going to cost you because they're not able to access MSBA, even though that they're basically a public entity in school. So I'm actually filing a bill right now, working with the collaboratives to allow the collaboratives to access it as well. But that pot of funds is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, especially as people are going out to, you know, online shop. You're not seeing that retail and the influx on there. Plus the building construction costs going through the roof. So looking long term, we need to find a better way to sustain the funding of MSBA. If we ever wanted to expand that to things like municipal projects, like senior centers, police stations, fire stations, libraries, which are another big part of it. Here in Wilbraham, you know, the roof is in desperate need over at the public library right now. So it is a good point to make, but we need to find a better and more reliable funding source.
And one of the things with the MSBA too, and just in general, because you're talking about how that funding is decreasing, one of the things that we find vexing from time to time is that, you know, we may have to shut down a school at the time. And I think you're well aware, and I think a lot of people in this room are aware that you have a 5-year clock. And if that building is not used as an educational facility for 5 years, you are now responsible for upgrading that building to today's codes. And that's, I mean, that's daunting for, you know, for anybody, but especially for a regional school district. You know, you just don't have the money for that. Again, you know, we look at renovation costs, and I believe the number is, Aaron, you might be able to help me with, like, it's 30%. So if your renovation cost exceeds 30% of the assessed value of the building, you now have to do a full renovation, which with escalated construction costs, I mean, even doing windows and doors, you're broaching upon that. And so, you know, from a legislative perspective, easing those regulations to give communities flexibility to be able to renovate the buildings as they see fit without necessarily triggering all of the, you know, full renovation costs would be absolutely huge for us. Because I know we had talked at one time about doing a couple different projects. I think it was Wilbraham Middle School, and it was basically like you can't do them at the same time, you know, because it's going to exceed that 30%.
We're facing the same thing in Buffalo with combined our 2 elementary schools together.
Yeah.
Veterans Park Elementary School is sitting there empty right now, and you know it's been sitting there now. I think it's about a year or 2, and you know that 5-year clock is coming pretty quickly, and it's not ADA accessible. To renovate that building would be millions and millions of dollars. I actually, just today, when we were with the economic development sector, there are other, options as well, including demo benefits. To take down a building sometimes can run you a few $1 million because it's filled, especially if they're built in the 50s and 60s, they're filled with nasty things. Not just asbestos, all sorts of different things. So the environmental hazards of these buildings, sitting empty and naked for so long, there are a pot of funds to actually take down some of these buildings that they're not being utilized over time. Is much better for open space, economic development, and that. So,
Can I encourage both bodies of the legislature to encourage your peers, to maybe those that are part of your municipality, to spend the day in an office of the business manager for a regional school district so that they can understand the things that they encounter? Because, I feel like sometimes people just need a field trip to realize just how bad something is. I think it's time for them to come out of whatever office you guys are in and start actually going into schools that may not be your own districts, so you can understand and feel the pain of the rest of us. And I don't mean that like in an aggressive kind of way or anything, I just, in a Hwrsd kind of way.
No, it's a good idea. We do, so a lot of our work in the legislature is done through committees. And, on the House side, you sit on maybe 3 or 4 committees, unless you're chairing a committee. On the Senate side, you could be sitting on up to 7. Those committees typically do field trips, let's say, so, or through a caucus as well. And so what we've done, like, on the food systems caucus, take you to, if you're in Boston, we've never seen, grass before, we'll take you to a farm and like Belchertown to see, kind of what's going on. The same thing on the education side as well, to see those various different school districts and how they operate. Because, there's also the issue of rural schools. And there's actually going to be legislation that's being filed on, there are school districts in Berkshire, we look at the declining student population right now. Go to Berkshire County, they've lost 30% of their student population over the last 2 decades. They're still paying down debt on buildings that they no longer use because the student population isn't big. So, I think the suburban, rural, and urban school district aspect, even if we don't represent those areas, we should learn about them.
100%, because I think at the end of the day, it doesn't hurt them to see what we go through. To Carol's point about looking at our assessment values, even just trying to do the homework at that, there are other regional school districts that have been doing that for 4 or 5 years. Keep in mind that as school committee members, you only have a term of 3 years. So imagine going through all that work to either not ousted, but get not reelected, to have that work either stop or pause. That if you're going to talk about cracking left open for formulas, then 100% would recommend someone at least take a look at that from the regional side, because so much has changed. Who's the closing remarks?
I don't have anything to share about the grant writing tonight other than we continue to look for other job descriptions that we could share. We did, as a part of the budget preparation that Aaron did, put aside certain money for new projects in next year, so I imagine that would be a potential funding source for that. So there's a little bit of progress with that. If it's okay, I would just move on to closing remarks and say, with no disrespect to the other elected officials in the room, January is National School Board Appreciation Month. And so I want to say that I think it's kind of a shame.
You missed it.
Patrick's comment
was it's the coldest month of the year.
I actually didn't know that either, and I've been doing this for 11 years, so I thank Steve and Nancy for letting me know that. But I'll say that I think it's somewhat unfortunate that in Massachusetts we use the term committee members for those of you who work, except at Smith Voc, where I was a member, where those of you who have been elected to represent the public are known as trustees. I think that's a much more elevated term, and I think it's an appropriate term for several reasons. First of all, education is a public trust, and you really are holding that public trust in your hands for our communities. Second of all, you are the most trustworthy people in the community as chosen by your fellow citizens. They've decided to put their trust in you. Third, I would say, from when you hired me, I talked about my servant leadership background and my training in that. Of course, the key book there is called The Leader as Servant, but there's also this one I like, it's called Trustees as Servants. And one of the things that Greenleaf says there is the job of the trustees is to make sure that whoever your chief executive is trustworthy and that they're building trust within the organization. And I think that's a great sort of North Star to live by. And then finally, I would just add that personally, I feel a great deal of trust when I walk into these meetings. And that's something that not many of my brother and sister superintendents have. And so that's something I cherish, and it's something that I don't underestimate. So, as a token of our appreciation, we'd just like to offer you some gifts of less than $50 value, right? In recognition of National School Board Appreciation Month. So thank you.
Can I just ask for Bruce and Sherry and for Jake? You expressed about, keeping in touch with your office. Can you guys, before you leave, share enough information with Aaron so that we have that communication pipeline? Because if you guys, if we're going to work together on this, and this is, your district now, so we want to be able to access you. Thank you. So if we can just share that with Aaron, that would be outstanding. And then I don't have the next meeting. The next roundtable is the 2nd, March 2nd. Okay. All right. I hope you guys can attend again. Did you guys? I wanted to just ask you guys because I really appreciate you guys coming, and we all do. Did you have any other comments? Any other questions? Anything for the folks that are here? I'm not asking you to say something if you don't have anything to say, but we really appreciate you coming out tonight and listening to us. And,
Okay. The detail, the examples that you've been able to give make it easier to fully understand what you're facing. So, and certainly we'll bring this back to Google. I'm sure he knows a lot of it already, but we'll make sure that he is aware of that so everyone can help him when he's working with Jake and the other legislators to try to help him.
Bruce, you got anything?
Yeah, I'll just add that, of course, Sherry, district manager of the Wilbraham office, located right on Boston Road. We're usually most likely we're both there, Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, plus, of course, extra stuff. So we're right there at the Wilbraham shops right down on Boston Road. So we're always available. Communications are so important. Budget times, especially budget times, and requesting the earmarks, requesting different things. We're always there. We have an office, of course, in Boston, where we have a chief of staff and a researcher in Boston. Rep. Pueblo, as much as he possibly can, is always available to whatever we can, if we get invited to anything, we'll definitely have to represent.
We meet every first and third Thursday of the month, so you're all more than welcome to come to any one of our meetings.
Thank you.
It's like right
I would just add, I want to introduce Jennifer Pickering, who some of you may know. So Jennifer is our district director. She actually stayed on for Mayor Blesser's office, so we're so thrilled to have Jennifer. There are 12 towns in my state senate district. Everything from South Hadley to Warren to Longmeadow, 11 school districts, and this is actually one of 2 regional school districts within my state senate district. The other one is Quabog, where Warren is located, which is in Worcester County. We're going to be doing regular office hours in each one of the 12 communities. It's a fairly large district. If you're going from East Longmeadow to the far end of Belchertown, you're talking 45 to 50 minutes. So it's a fairly large district to be in. We will try to be I'll be there at the next meeting in March, but we want to be as accessible as possible. I mean, we have about 170,000 people that live in the state senate district. You can all have my cell phone. I put it on, I put it on all my campaign literature. I mean, no secret. Only got called free prank calls, but call us, call the office, text us, email us. Emailing is the best on there because we can actually track it a little bit easier. And if I can't get the answer, we can, make sure we can get the answer and make sure it's recorded. I just wanted to read tonight, since it is school board appreciation month, and Superintendent Provost made the point that we're one of actually 2 states that are school committees instead of school boards or trustees. Can anybody name the other state?
California?
No. The trustees.
Virginia.
No. Close enough.
Connecticut?
Close.
Rhode Island.
Rhode Island. Rhode Island is the only other one that they were called school committee members. And another piece of trivia, because I'm ridiculous about this stuff. The first school board in the United States is actually right here in Massachusetts. So the legislature, in our infinite wisdom in the colonial times in 1647, said that any community that had more than 50 persons had to hire a teacher to educate that community. And every one of those communities had to elect a school committee in order to administer it. So you're talking about close to a 400, almost 400-year history, 350-year history of school boards that began right here in Massachusetts. And the last piece of trivia, because it's getting late, I don't need tonight, to congratulate all the school board members. There was a guy named Calvin Coolidge, Western Mass's only president, known well in Northampton. He was elected to the city council. He was elected mayor of Northampton. He was elected state representative. He was elected state senator. He became state senate president. He was lieutenant governor of Massachusetts, governor of Massachusetts, vice president, and president of the United States. A total of, I think, 11 elected offices. There was only one thing that he never got elected to and actually lost for school board. So congratulations. You've been elected to something that a guy who was elected to everything couldn't get elected to. So happy school board appreciation.
So keep in mind that we also volunteer and don't get paid, unlike a lot of other schools that get a lot of funding from the state, but they have paid members. Can I make a motion to adjourn that school committee?
Actually, just before we go, I just want to actually thank everybody here around this table for being part of the solution. I know Patrick says that, each year we have the same agenda, but I think we're seeing some movement, and I really appreciate everybody here being part of that. Thank you. I'm sorry, I second that. Thank you.
I roll call vote.
Aye.